Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining the PropsClear podcast. I'm your host, Jillian Angeline, where we talk all about drones and about improving public perception around them. Today, I'm joined by James Grimsley. He works with the Choctaw Nation. He's Executive Director of Advanced Technology Initiatives, and he's also the Oklahoma Transportation Commissioner for District 2. Quite an incredible list of accomplishments that you have, James.
Thank you.
Talk with me first about the updates about what the Choctaw Nation is doing now. It sounds like there's quite a bit going on in that corridor north of Dallas, correct?
Yes, correct. We started out very busy when I started working with the Choctaw Nation several years ago to kind of develop this concept. It has not slowed down. Literally every week we get busier. We're building new things. We're doing new things, and it's been the most exciting time of my career. I've always had a passion for advanced transportation. In fact, I was fortunate enough to spend most of my career working advanced aviation, emerging aviation technologies and stuff. But I've never been more excited and passionate than I am now, because now we're working with a really neat community, a community where I grew up within the reservation. We're actually looking at how we're going to leapfrog into the future with this and overcome a lot of our transportation challenges we have now. And so I'm very excited. A lot is happening. We do sit on the north side of the Texas state line, Oklahoma Texas state border. And North Texas is growing like crazy. It will be the third largest metropolitan area by 2030, overtaking Chicago. And that growth is coming this direction.
And so what you're all doing there is allowing companies and contractors to test things like package delivery,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what, regular people want to know is, can I in the future, and in the near future, actually it's not even considered future now, can
Right.
I click a few buttons and have, my lunch or my dinner
Right.
at my doorstep or at my backyard dropped by a drone?
Right. Exactly. And one of the neat things about what we have is the tribe owns a very large piece of property. It's 25 miles long, 44,600 plus acres. So the tribe has jurisdiction over that surface. They can pass controls, they can control the surface. And if you look at aviation testing, being able to control the ground risk is a big part of it. And so one of the ways that we're able to do testing is there really is no good alternative outside of the military test ranges, because the military has restricted special use airspace. But we control the surface, so we're the next best thing to what the military can do. So we add mitigations. We have our own network of radars. We have our own ADSB receiver network. We have our own command and control, radio network. We're building out all these things to make the airspace very, very safe here, and then we control the surface risk. So it's a lot easier for companies, even military contractors, to fly here than a lot of other places. The Choctaw Nation was the first tribe to come across in what is now called the Trail of Tears. It was a forced relocation, and so they lost their ancestral homelands in Mississippi, signed a treaty. Those treaties said that basically, if they gave up their ancestral homeland and moved to what was called Indian Territory at the time, that they would their health care they would be taken care of in perpetuity, and that would be their land. Unfortunately, those treaties were repeatedly broken, over the history. But one of the things that I've always admired in growing up with many of my friends were Choctaw when I grew up. The Choctaws are very resilient people, but they're definitely not averse to technology in the future. But they also look at this balance of you know sort of the life balance. It has a place. It can better our lives. It can improve the quality of our health, but it does have a place in there. And also the Choctaws historically, if you go back to a lot of the history and a lot of the stories that were passed down, there's an interesting connection between the sky and the Choctaw people. So we
Oh.
actually there's some NASA funded effort going on right now trying to collect those stories about how the Choctaw Nation viewed Earth, how we viewed things in the sky. But the tribe itself is very forward thinking. We have leadership that understands that to really continue to improve the quality of life of our members and in our communities, we don't just worry about just our members, we look at our communities as well. That we have to look at how we can bridge some of the problems we have with technology. And the way we look at it is that technology sometimes can leapfrog ahead of problems. And as a transportation commissioner, I deal with that. Our highways are not up to where they need to be. We have a lot of rural, dangerous highways in the Choctaw Nation. And we have the realization and reality that we're probably not going to have any money in this country to really go build and fix that whole network. It's just too big, too expensive. But as we begin to look at what's on the horizon for emerging aviation, we believe we can leapfrog and we can basically build the infrastructure to take advantage of emerging aviation much cheaper than we could go back and rebuild our roads and stuff. And philosophically, I believe that we're long overdue for transportation disruption, where we have this disruption that totally democratizes the technology for everyone. That never happened in aviation. To say that being riding on a airliner is commercialization or democratization is like saying riding on a bus is democratization. It really isn't. The biggest democratization event we had in transportation was the automobile over a century ago, when everyone became affordable to get one. It's easy to learn how to drive. That you get your license, so it was within reach of pretty much everybody. To be a pilot, you still have to have means. You still have, it's expensive to own an aircraft or lease an aircraft to pay the insurance and all of that. And plus, it takes some education to become a pilot now. It's not something that's easily achievable for everyone. So we've never had in aviation a democratization moment. And it's possible that we may be on the cusp of that. And when a democratization moment happens with technology, a lot of times the effects are far more than we ever realized. I remember in the early 90s, I was on some academic think tanks, looking at the impact of the internet, and none of us envisioned things like social media or really how it would change the world. And so I think the same thing is going to happen here. I don't think we fully realize what's going to happen, but I do believe it will be remarkable because we're long overdue for that type of a transportation disruption. Um, and if you look at a lot of the inequities we have in this country, urban versus rural, poor areas of stuff, typically it's access to access to quality healthcare, access to quality education, access to quality jobs. And if we can solve and really sort of leapfrog over these problems we have right now, we can solve a lot of these inequities in the future. And we can start to look at rural areas that can start to have the quality of life of maybe an urban area. We can be able to solve some of those issues. We're, in some ways, we've already done that with connectivity. When I grew up as a kid in the reservation 50 years ago, my connection to the outside world was a copper telephone line and one or two television stations that every once in a while we got clearly, right? But now anywhere in the world almost is becoming easy to be connected, and so we have the access to the history of the knowledge of mankind in our hand. And not even the wealthiest, most educated, most powerful person on the planet when I was a kid in the reservation 50 years ago had that. So we haven't fully comprehended the impacts of that, but we're long overdue, and I do believe that's coming in transportation.
That makes me so excited. it's
Me
really
too.
it's really
Me too.
something you can feel like inside of you, that excitement about something like that. And one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast is to improve public perception, because
Yes.
what I've been hearing, both at the conference, Commercial UAV Expo,
Mhm.
but also just talking with people, a lot of
Right.
people don't even understand what drones are used for.
Right.
In the public's eye, people that are in the aviation world are
Mhm.
are much farther ahead in terms of what drones are used for, how to fix them and work with them. But out in the world, people, before we start seeing multiple drones going by carrying people and carrying medical supplies and
Right.
carrying your ice
Right.
cream,
Right.
we have to explain to people
Right.
what it is. And one of the things that I love about what you're doing is you're doing a lot of STEM and STEAM
Mhm.
programs.
When I talk with our tribal leadership, when we look at what do we believe the biggest success of this, and it's brought a whole lot of recognition to the tribe. It's bringing economic opportunities here, but we really believe the biggest impact is what it has done for STEM. We have multiple aviation programs that are popped up in our high schools. This is a very historically impoverished area, very poor, and we always historically exported our people. Um, growing up in a poor area, no one has college funds, no one's thinking about that. And I grew up here at a time when I knew that I wanted to go do something. I needed to get out and go do something, but I had to pay for my own school. So that was a time when you could actually go flip burgers, make minimum wage, and pay your tuition, pay your rent. That's not that way anymore. But I know what it's like to bootstrap, and in the people in the leadership here within the tribe, it's very high number of first generation college graduates. And so, but we see what we're doing is what we hope to do is first of all enable a whole generation of Choctaw and in our also our just our community partners to get into these fields, exposing them to. I never knew an engineer growing up. I was never around an engineer. But we want to have role models for them here in the reservation and let them know that just the vast opportunities, just that if they get that basic kind of degree and education, just the opportunities that will lie ahead for them. And I almost envy people that will be graduating college in the next 5 to 10 years because the opportunities are going to be so immense. But we do think that is one of the biggest successes. We hope to have opportunities where those kids can go off to school, become adults, and then come back here. Because we would love to be able to provide opportunities within the reservation where they can have really good jobs, a really good future, and then still be able to be tied to the reservation and the tribal culture.
That's fantastic. Have you worked with some of these students, and what kind of feedback have you gotten from
Yes,
them
we're already
directly?
starting to see some kids. I say kids that now they would be college kids. They're college students. They'd be adults. We're already seeing some that are declaring like aerospace engineering, electrical engineering. There's so many paths to get into this new kind of emerging aviation field. We're already seeing that happen, and we do host all sorts of events for youth. We do camps. We have schools visit. We go visit schools. But we're doing as much as we can because we see that as literally one of the biggest and best investments we make is in our people for the future. But it really is remarkable what we're seeing. Multiple high schools now have aviation programs. This is a historically impoverished area that didn't have anything like that when I was growing up here. But we're seeing strong interest from the principals, the superintendents, the parents, the teachers, and that's been one of the most rewarding parts of that job for me. Coming back to an area, knowing what it was like to sort of being in that learned helplessness, where you didn't have people around you that were thinking about college or they weren't really, you didn't have engineers you could go talk to, so you didn't have those role models in your life. And what excites me is we're bringing that back now. So we have my technical deputy on the program is actually has a PhD in applied physics. I spent 10 years working a lot of NASA projects, very, very sharp. And we're trying to get those kind of role models where the youth around here can go talk to somebody. How did you get there? What was it like going through school? Tell me about the things you've been able to work on. Those are things that are very important to us.
Now, taking that kind of mentality and applying it to the rest of the schools across the nation, I know there are some schools. I mean, I've talked with students who are doing projects for
Right,
NASA, designing things that the astronauts can use up in space.
right,
There's definitely programs like that in places. But
right,
how do you, I guess, democratize
right.
that kind of education?
We always think it's this big investment in technology and buildings and all those things. What it comes down to is children are very much impacted by people who have confidence in them. And there's what's missing too often, and a lot of the kids, I think it's gotten worse, the past 30, 40, 50 years, is that many kids don't really have adults in their life that says, I have confidence, I believe in you, I believe you're going to go do something really cool. And so we try to do things where the kids get a sense of accomplishment. And then we reaffirm that, we knew you could do this. And we never have students fail. We have some complicated things we do, and they all succeed and finish what they're doing. But you see the light bulb going on, and what kids need, and it's not just us; it's around the country. Kids need to see professionals, people that have gone off and done this. Okay, I've designed all kinds of things, had a good career as an engineer, but kids need to see that where those people can come back and say, this is how I did it, and I thoroughly believe that you can do it as well. They need that confidence, and that's when we see kids bloom and blossom. They just that you can literally see the light bulb come on that this is something that I can do. And instead of being in the learned helpless environment where you're like, well, all the people around me aren't doing this. This is what I'm destined to do. You say, no, there's something I can go out and do that's maybe bigger and better than what I'm realizing now. So that it really comes down to that involvement of the adults and those of us who are professionals who have been, able to be exposed, get the education, get out and do neat things. It's really our responsibility to come back, and that's how we give back, sort of pay it forward. Is let's encourage this next generation to as much as we can.
So I guess you're charging educators across the country with
We
going
hope.
out, getting the
Yeah,
knowledge, maybe even getting like part 107 or something like that,
exactly. Hmm.
starting from the ground up,
Yes.
getting that idea about learning about airspace and then taking
Yes.
it back to the classroom.
Mhm. Exactly. And so we have a lot of the youth here that are getting their Part 107. We have a lot of them that are also getting their private pilot's license. And so we're starting to see even the legacy aviation benefit from a lot of that. But it's going to be exciting 5 to 10 years is when I believe we're going to start to see a measure of what we're doing. Is it successful? And that's going to be exciting.
Then the other thing is, you have the students covered, or you're trying to
Hmm.
have the students covered, but then it goes to, the rest of the population, the
Yes.
30, 40, 50, 60, 70
Hmm.
year olds,
Right.
who maybe, they've seen the internet age.
Hmm.
They went from, like you said, copper telephone
Right.
to the
Exactly.
internet, and to seeing that. But then, you know, some of them have a lot of distrust with
Yes.
that kind of something.
I think you would almost call it discomfort is what
Hmm.
people have. And I'd always worked military drones. First, half of my career was military drones. And I really didn't get involved into like commercial, civil non-military applications of drones till around 2007. And I just immersed myself in it because I started to see the potential and also got very heavily involved in policy. And in the early days, we totally blew it in terms of public, involvement, the how we related to the public, because the first exposure that people had of drones, it was almost this two-word phrase that we always heard: "drone strike." And so they would see a missile-laden predator or something, and that's a drone. Well, I don't want that flying over my backyard. If I don't know much about it, that's a, and it was not a whole lot different than World War One. Most of the world, the first exposure that people had to aircraft was in conflict and battle, where they saw these things with machine guns throwing bombs out, and it wasn't a great image. But unfortunately, we didn't do well in the early part of this industry on the commercial side by not listening to people. And we almost came across as saying, well, you don't like it because you're not smart enough to understand it, which is the absolute wrong message anytime. And one of the things as I got into that, I was really confused why you would have some people really excited and optimistic, and some people just so against it. And fortunately, when I was at the university, I was able to work with some of the best applied social scientists around, and started learning how you communicate, how you get to the bottom of I'm not comfortable with something, I have a discomfort. How do you get where you can understand that? And it occurred to me early on as I would talk to people, because everyone say privacy. I'm worried about my privacy, worried about my privacy. And the industry jumped to this real cerebral. Well, we'll anonymize the data. We'll have a data retention policy. We'll do all these things, and that'll solve it. And they had never spent just a little bit of time in dialogue with the public. I would watch their body language as well as listen to them. So when they would say things like privacy, they would start to do, you'd see this body language. And there's some real simple things that are just undeniable, almost immutable, and that is that we don't like things moving around over our head, right? What do you do if something's moving? You duck, you move out of the way. Well, if you think the first images people had a lot of drones is a big flying tarantula, you don't want it over your head, right? The proximity is a much different thing, and it started to remind me when my daughter was about 7, 8, 9, and my son was 4 or 5, and I would hear her yell from across the house and downstairs, get out of here, you're invading my privacy. Well, he wasn't in there like going through her diary, he was in her hair, he was just bugging her in her space, he was in her bubble, right?
Hmm.
And so that's the go-to word with somebody is like encroaching. It's my privacy, right? You're invading my privacy, and it's not spying on me. It's that proximity that makes people uncomfortable. And as we started to understand that, we started to do experiments about flying at 400 foot, 300 foot, 200 foot to see, would this bother you? If you had regular drone delivery going on, would that bother you? And what we found out is above 200 feet, people are like, that's so far up there. I don't even hear it. No, I wouldn't be concerned if Amazon's flying or whoever. I don't care if it's that high. And people start getting more uncomfortable the lower you get. But you get down to 50, 35, then people are like, yeah, that's a little close. If I didn't ask for it to be there, might not be comfortable with it. But if you look at things like drone delivery, it's going to be happening a lot higher. And so it became more and more clear to me. I'm not a social scientist, but it did become clear to me that we misunderstood what the public was saying. The public very much understands the benefits. The public would love to have the convenience. If we had had the rules in place when the pandemic started, If we had been able to do drone delivery, it would be wide scale and ubiquitous right now, because we were in this mode where we were willing to change how we work, how we do business, because we had this threat of the pandemic. Think about, curbside delivery, all these things that we weren't really doing before that we are doing very heavily now. So I believe that there are definitely legitimate concerns, but I believe they're going to be dealt with. Um, and the example that I like to use is, I remember Google Street View when it first came out, and lots of people were getting embarrassed because the little car zips by and they're walking out of a place they shouldn't be in, or they're doing something they shouldn't be, right? Well, then that's for eternity. That's now part of Street View. But Google solved it very simply in that they just have algorithms that look for a human face, and it just blurs and obfuscates the face and anonymizes it. Does it for license tags, and for some reason, when I was going through Street View, it seemed to do it for dogs' faces. So it's also protecting the privacy of dogs, I guess. I don't know. But I do believe that the potential for upending a lot of our transportation problems in this country is immense with emerging aviation. One of the things that bothers me as a commissioner, is that the growing fatality rate in ground transportation on the ground. We have somewhere, 42, 47. It's in the 40s and it's going up. Of 47,000 or so traffic fatalities a year in the United States. Um, 2021 was the largest percentage increase in traffic fatalities since the end of World War II, and in Oklahoma, it's increased by 21% since 2019. Majority are rural areas. 65% of our fatalities in Oklahoma are the rural highways, even though 35% of our population lives there. It's this weird inverse relationship. But we're getting worse on the ground, and in comparison, we haven't had a major air carrier accident with fatalities in 14 years in the United States, and we've literally moved around 7 billion people. So 7 billion people have been transported and moved without a fatality accident in airlines. We still have some with general aviation, but that's somewhere around the order of 300 a year in aviation versus 47,000. So we've figured out a way to make it safe, and it's untenable in the future to keep building highways, because for a century we always increase lanes, we build a new highway, we increase that capacity to meet demand, and what happens is we create induced demand. By when we do it, make it bigger, that just seems to want to pull more demand in there, right? More traffic volumes. And we've reached a point where we realize that building highways is a very destructive thing. We destroy communities. Horrible things have happened in the past. Communities are gone. And a lot of times when we build those big projects, we go where the land is cheap. That means that the people are poorer. They don't have the means or the financial ability to fight eminent domain or fight back on things. And so it is very, very unjust a lot of times, in my opinion, how we do that. But we disrupt wildlife corridors. We directly impact wildlife. We destroy watersheds. There's so many things happen. And if we abandon the highway, it scarred the landscape forever. You could tell for a long time there was something there. You've permanently altered the landscape, it seems. And so, to me, the infrastructure that we're going to need for all of this stuff for emerging aviation to do it very, very safely, much cheaper, and it's a whole lot more sustainable, I believe, too. Especially if we can eventually move to hydrogen fuel. There's so many things on the horizon that would be incredible. Just for society, if we're able to do it. But I do see that's where the potential will be, is aviation. I don't. Our ground transportation network is not going to go away, for at least this century, maybe the next century, but we can no longer think of it as something that we continue to expand and build and scale. We have to put a limit on it at some point. So let's get the best use out of this we can, try to make it safer, but there's another mode of transportation that can meet our demands much better.
I mean, you are an Oklahoma transportation commissioner, so obviously you deal with the government. It is the fact that federal regulations aren't moving fast enough creating the hurdles that is making it harder for people like you across the country to do the jobs. And I mean, you make it sound like, if it sounds like if you were in charge, we'd have drones flying and delivering things and people would be traveling on
Right.
them, tomorrow. But that's not the case.
I remember, 2000, 2007, 2008. The year 2015 seemed so far in the future to me at that time that I thought we'd have a lot of this solved, and now we're, well beyond that. The reality is that our safety in aviation, some ways, hurts us now, because what happens is we're very reluctant to change it. We've made it safe, but we've done it in terms of 1958 thinking. If you think a lot of how aviation operates is around the late 50s, that's when the FAA came into existence. We had a half century of data from the old CAA and the old predecessors of the FAA, but we didn't change a lot. We had physical separation of the aircraft. We thought in terms of these circular radar sweeps of how we managed airspace and stuff. And we haven't modernized a whole lot. Now it works. What we've done, it works for the capacity that we have right now, but it will not work for the capacity if we want to increase the density of operations. And so we have to look at modernizing technology, and we have the ability. There's so much tremendous technology that was not available in 1958. We didn't have GPS, we didn't have ADSB, we didn't have all of these other things. Uh, and so I do believe um, we have to take some risks, but we also, one of the biggest problems we have in aviation, I'll talk about this just for a moment, but is we've always thought of the risk in aviation as only the things that happen in the air. Either a plane crashes and does damage or kills somebody on the ground, or we bang metal in the air. Two aircraft collide and cause either fatalities or damage. But we don't look at a broader risk. We have this very limited view of risk that we evaluate for aviation, but we need to think about it in terms of broader, where we sort of open up the risk aperture. We say, what is the risk of inaction? What is the risk if we change nothing? The aviation rules don't change. Are we comfortable letting 47,000, 48,000, 49,000, 50,000 people die on the ground? Are we comfortable with destroying all of the communities but because we have to continue to build roads? Are we comfortable with that? Or are we willing to say, if we'll change our risk aperture and our way we look at risk in aviation a little bit, maybe we should consider those things in how we look at aviation. So I think broadening how we think about the risk, thinking a little bit more holistically, is one of the things we need. I do believe that when there's public support and public will, there's political will. And I believe that we're going to see communities that have been very forward leaning, like the Choctaw Nation and others, we're going to start to see these benefits. And when people see those benefits and that they start to see that community is getting some pretty cool things happening, then it will be infectious. Then it will be, why can't my community do that? And it's almost like the early days of people building airports. It wasn't something everyone initially wanted to do because a lot of people were afraid of the aircraft. They always seem to crash into barns and chicken coops when aircraft. I don't know. If you look through the photo history, that seemed to be the case. But there were those forward-looking communities that said, we need a place, an aerodrome or an airport where these can land and take off. And it'll be the same thing here, where we'll probably have a dozen places in the United States that says, okay, we're all in. We're going to make the infrastructure possible. We're going to make it possible to start doing this here. And that will be the infection. That'll be the contagion that really starts to say, okay, this is possible. There's a benefit. We actually see that benefit. That's what will start to move us toward, what we call ubiquity, which means it can start to happen everywhere.
And you think that pressure will be put on the federal regulators if there's enough public support, and then it might actually move forward in a slightly quicker manner?
I think so because there's multiple things at play. Initially, when we started, a lot of us that were trying to change regulations, we were able to apply political pressure. Now we're seeing financial pressure because the amount of money that's been invested in emerging aviation over the past 3 or 4 years is unbelievable. So you have not only that political, but you have this financial, economic, pressure there. But we're also going to see a generational impact, and we always sometimes think statically, but we're evolving in terms of generational how different generations look at technology. My own kids looked at driving a car totally different. They didn't see a driver's license as this urgent necessity like I did. I couldn't sleep the night before I turned 16 because I was taking my test that day, and all of a sudden I had this immense freedom because I could drive. My kids didn't think about that. It wasn't that important to them, and I think that we will see the upcoming generations have a better sense of the technology, how it applies to their lives than people my generation do. And so I think we'll start to see those generational aspects where transportation is not the fun thing I'm doing. Transportation is it's making, it's helping me do the things that I want to do. It's not in and of itself the end. It's helping me to get places, help to do things. I would love to have a driverless automobile. I'd rather be doing other things than driving my automobile, when I'm going to work or something or on a long trip. And so I think that's how we'll start to look at it, is that we'll harness it in ways that lets us do what we really want to do with our time.
I love that. And there are autonomous, vehicles driving the lifts, some of the lifts, some Ubers in some cities, some trucks carrying cargo from what I'm hearing. They're testing that as well.
Yeah, and the interesting concept out there with trucking is what's called platooning, where you'll have a lead truck and then you have several driverless trucks that all follow. And the neat thing about that is that those trucks are not going to get tired. They don't have to stop after 10 hours because there's a mandate of driving time by the USDOT. They can drive all the time. But we can also say, let's incentivize these companies to drive all night when the most people are not on the road, so there's less traffic. We pull it off. So I believe we'll be able to incentivize that in ways that improves our ground safety, quite a bit. I do believe that we're in a precarious position when you have a mixture of automated or highly driver assist technology vehicles, and then those that don't have it. That's a precarious place because they have to coexist. Once you have virtually everything that either has a high level of driver assist or autonomy, then you start to have a little bit safer system. And Elon Musk has said this in the past. There will be a time when you'll either have to have a very, very difficult special permit to drive your car or it'll be illegal because your car will be able to drive so much better than you can that it's not going to be the skill of the driver anymore. It's going to be known we have the potential to mess it up, and I believe that that is on the horizon. A few years down the road. If I'm driving an hour to get to a meeting, um, I would actually rather sit there and work on my laptop or my phone and let my car drive itself. There are other things I'd rather do. And I think the majority of our driving is that way. There are other things we would probably rather do, and how many times do we get in our car and literally put our lives at risk to go because we need toothpaste? That's the example I use. You need to go buy a tube of toothpaste. You literally put your life on the line. If I wouldn't care if an autonomous vehicle brought it to me or a drone brought it to me, that at some point I'm going to look at that and say, there's a surcharge for convenience. I'll pay that surcharge because I'll get to spend an extra 2 hours here, doing what I want to do rather than going to buy toothpaste. So I think that we'll start to get this balance in society where we look at this convenience, we'll monetize it, we'll figure out what's the value to us and what's that ROI for the companies. But I do think it has the ability to change our life a lot, and how we enjoy our lives. Instead of spending an hour and a half one way in a large congested area, maybe there's a easier way to get to work where we use a 3D airspace rather than this flat congested corridor on the ground.
All of these things you're talking about, do you feel like there are countries that will be seeing this reality in the near future faster than us?
Yeah, and it's very complex as to why. The United States has the busiest but most sophisticated and complicated airspace in the world, but it's the safest. There are other countries that don't have the traffic densities and they don't necessarily have that strong regulatory structure. Now, it means that sometimes they're not as safe, but they do end up with a more permissive regulatory system. And so you see places like New Zealand that just doesn't have that much traffic. They're able to do things now that are very difficult to do here, or even Ireland. If you go to a lot of places in Europe, or Africa. If you look at what Zipline's been able to do in Africa, it's absolutely incredible, saving lives and moving things around for emergency medical stuff, humanitarian purposes, and it's just a much less complicated airspace that they're able to work with. So there are other countries, and then some are just totalitarian, and, so they can. A dictator will dictate that this is going to happen, and force that will on his people, which I don't. That's not obviously what we want here, but I do think that we are in a situation where it's very globally competitive, and this is going to be something very disruptive potentially, and we have to start thinking about economic security like we do national security. That it's difficult to have national security if we don't have economic security, and part of our economic security is our competitiveness around the globe.
If you could list like maybe three countries you think that are going to be ahead of us, is that a reality for you?
I think Australia is doing really good stuff. I think New Zealand, and then for number three, there's some cool things happening in Ireland. I mention Ireland because there's a unique cultural bond between Ireland and the Choctaw people that goes back to the Irish famine that was happening around kind of in that same couple of decades as the Trail of Tears location. Yes. Well, one of the neat things that happened with the Choctaw Nation is they were in dire poverty. I mean, they've lost everything they owned. They went to this land, the new part of the country. They heard about the famine and raised money, and it was like a few $100s at the time. Doesn't sound like a lot, but for people who had nothing, it was a lot of money. And they sent that to Ireland to help, just help with the famine. And now we have this cultural bond. We have a monument to the Irish people within Choctaw Nation. If you go travel to Ireland, there's a beautiful monument to the Choctaw people, and our leadership visits and goes back and forth. And so we have this cultural bond. I've actually been on calls. We have a great relationship with the Irish Aviation Authority there, and so we just compare ideas and stuff. So I think it's an interesting country in that it's one of the biggest countries that does aircraft leasing. So they already automatically depend on aviation for a lot of their revenue and gross domestic product.
Thank you so much, James, for your time. This has been an incredibly enlightening discussion. And so thank you so much for watching and for listening to the PropsClear podcast. Be sure to follow on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts or watch your podcasts on. And if you have any topics or suggestions for guests or ideas, please feel free to email me, angelswings.jillian@gmail.com.